Hey everyone, welcome back. First half of December here, 2021, and just kind of give you an overview of what's going on the last couple of weeks. I've got the fuel tanks mostly done. What I'm doing there is kind of taking some look inside the leading edge of the tank there before I do any filling of the tank. Debated on whether or not I wanted to do some water tests ahead of time because I was pretty confident that the tanks were sealed up real well, and you might be able to guess by the amount of water hitting the floor there that doing the water test actually was a pretty good idea. I found a couple of pretty good sized leaks in the tank that just were very obscure, and I honestly wouldn't have thought that they were there. But they were in spots that, had I completely closed the tank up, it would have been a huge hassle to completely rework the tank to get those holes filled up. So I'm super glad that I did that, and I've just really gone kind of out of my way to make sure that I'm testing it all now. That rod you see with the yellow on the table there is a camera that I can use to extend into the tanks and other areas. So it just connects up to the camera or up to my phone, and you can actually record the sessions and whatnot. But I'm just emptying the tanks out there outside. It's just water, so it's just going to go draining down the gutter there. So I got a bunch of the the fuselage material all over and hung up on the wall. I actually used up most of the parts for the empennage that was already on the wall. And since I'm waiting on parts, I was waiting on the parts at the time for the wings still, I went ahead and started working on the tail end of the fuselage. And Lori made a quick run down to her dad's house and picked up a bunch of the ribs necessary to build for the back end, or the back end of the fuselage. And the parts that are actually sitting there to the right are the very tail end, and I was just getting started on that. So I'm sort of flipping back and forth between fiddling with the fuel tanks and working on the back end of the fuselage there. Looks like I probably ought to get another camera if I'm going to keep working over there in that corner, because it's very hard to see what's going on, and it's really not useful to either documentation or anybody watching this. That's the picture of what this end portion of the fuselage is supposed to look like when it's done, and I was missing a couple of parts. It's mostly just some stainless steel rivets to be able to complete this part, and I've got those now. I just haven't been able to come back around to it since I got some other material in the meantime that should be ahead of that. So it's a little tricky putting it together. There's definitely an order to doing this because you can't gain access to certain areas if you do it in the incorrect order. But I got most of that together, and since I was waiting on the parts, I went ahead and started working on the additional ribs that were next. And what I'm doing here is inventorying the material that came in. And what you'll see here in a second is the torque tube that I've been waiting on since August. I needed two, and I got one, but one was to get me started, and that was the last piece that I needed in order to complete the wing assembly. But that was going to wait because I had all the fuselage material sitting on the bench, and wanted to get that actually put together. Since I had it sitting on the bench, it just made sense. I hadn't worked with this jig yet. That big kind of, I don't even know what kind of shape that is. It's like a triangle on top, and then I don't know, something else. That's the jig for the rear fuselage. And or what I'm doing here is I'm cleaning off the parts for the very tail end that you saw together there. I'm starting to cut that out on some of these longer videos, because you don't really need to see me cleaning and deburring every single piece that I put together. Kind of gets repetitive after a while. It's kind of fun though. I mean, just put on some rubber gloves, keep your hands protected, because that simple green with the aluminum, it definitely comes off, cleans off quite a bit, and so there's a lot of aluminum residue that if you don't wear gloves, your hands are just covered in it for a couple of days. So, yeah, so I got all that cleaned off there, and I do a lot of, I mean, I really think you should probably dry fit all the parts together to make sure that you have them and that you've got the correct order, kind of understand how things should look when they're together. The pictures that are in the assembly documents they give you good representation of what each piece should look like. And so you'll see that throughout this video here. So, but I like to look ahead and see where it's supposed to go and what I'm working towards. But just getting it riveted together here. And this one, once I get it all cleaned and deburred and ready to go, I think it probably took me maybe a half an hour or something like that to completely put it together. So then every so often you'll see me look at the iPad over the printed documents, and a lot of that is because the printed versions, there's a date and a revision number on each page that you're working with. And it's not uncommon for something that maybe doesn't make sense or is kind of weird on the printed version, that there may be some additional information or some new information or other part identifiers that are on the PDFs that are online. So it's good to definitely go back and consult with the electronic version and compare that against the printed version, because you may get additional information on that. This is a couple days later. I'd sealed up what I thought were all the necessary holes in the fuel tanks and decided to go ahead and do another fuel test, or I'm sorry, not a fuel test, but a fill-up test with sort of some water there. And you may see a little bit of water on the floor here. I didn't quite, so one tank filled up really, really well when it was on the bench, and the other tank just absolutely didn't at all. And so I stopped filling that one up pretty much right away. And that, come to find out, there was a leak at the other end of that tank that still needed to be addressed that I didn't see the first go around. The first tank really sealed up really well. The one thing that I didn't get sealed up well enough was the fuel cap portion of things, which I went back through and touched up. I've got some smaller sampler or smaller can of the Pro Seal that I can mix up little batches of it that I can apply directly to individual spots. It takes just a couple minutes to mix it up. It's not a big deal. But I'm really trying hard to get these fuel tanks squared away, because I think, at least at this phase of things, the fuel tanks are probably going to be the hardest thing to do. Overall, most of this stuff just really goes together pretty straightforward. Here I am going back through, and I'm actually cleaning up a mistake that I'd made. I'd put in the rivet plates that go on the very tail end of that, and I got a little ahead of myself and put the plates in. They actually go in that, if you look at that piece that's sitting upright, the top two rivet plates actually go through that horizontal part that's standing upright into that piece that I'm working on right there. And of course they're stainless steel rivets, so they're a little bit more difficult to remove and take a little more encouragement to get actually off the piece. But I got them off, and that's some of the parts that I'm just waiting on, or I have now, and I just need to go back through and finish it. But I wanted to get that at least cleaned up and prepped so when I did get the material that I could easily get that knocked out. And that'll be coming up here in the latter half of December, focusing on the wings at this point in time, since I've got that torque tube sitting there. There are some bolts that go through this, and I believe these are the AN3s, which have a torque setting of like 2.5 pounds or newton meters. It's in the documentation there, so I just basically check that anytime I need to torque anything. Took me a little while to get the correct torque wrench that actually was that light in torquing. The one that was online that was recommended, it doesn't even go down far enough. So I actually found a bicycle torque wrench that works really well, and it's actually, of all the ones that I've got right now, that's easily the one that works the best. But I got that all taken care of, set aside, and now it's time to work on the actual ribs in the back part of the fuselage. For whatever reason, the jig here was covered in the same plastic that everything else is covered in. it was mostly stuck to it, so I figured, well, I'll just go ahead and take it off. I did not deburr it or clean it. It's not a part that goes in the airplane. It's just something to make sure that you get these ribs put together correct. But I took the plastic off. So this is the rib 5 that goes in the just next up from the very tail end of the fuselage. And since this was the first one to actually work on, is a little bit of a, okay, well, what part goes where, and then how does this jig work, and what order should this go together? And it took a lot of fiddling to try to understand how to use the jig and then the parts. And the parts, while they, especially the corners, the two end pieces that are closest to me on the corners, they look almost identical, but they absolutely 100% don't line up correctly in the jig unless they're in exactly the right spot. So left or right or left. And took me a little while to figure that out because the pieces weren't, like, holes were just a little bit off. And as soon as I moved things around and tried a couple of different ways, all of a sudden everything went into place and every hole lined up and it was just perfect. So, and that's pretty typical for this kit that I've been working on. It's amazing how much of this, it only goes together one way, and it's just built that way. So it's almost impossible to say I'm putting this piece in the wrong spot, because that absolutely won't fit in that spot. So if something's not lining up and you're having to actually drill a hole, that's about the time you want to stop and say, okay, look, something's not lining up here. What is wrong here, and what am I not doing correctly? The most I really ever have to do is sometimes there's a tiny little difference between the two parts, and the rivet just won't quite sneak through the hole. So I grab the drill and kind of clean it up a little bit to allow that to go through. But this is what that part looks like once together, and then it's just rinse and repeat. So rib 4 goes here. This one's a little bit different. It's got that horizontal bar that has a push rod guide in the middle of it. And the push rods are, those guides are actually kind of neat. It's a pretty solid or substantial piece of, I believe it's metal. It kind of feels like it. But they're held in there with a clamp and then four rivets around the hole. So now since I'd already gone through with the jig on the first one, the second one went a little bit easier. And then again, consulting the online documentation, make sure I'm doing it right. And some of this also is trying to figure out exactly what spot the top portion goes to in the jig. So I start at the top and then work my way around the rest of the pieces. And the way this lines up is there's one hole in each of the pieces that fit into the jig, and then there's another hole that's open that's not part of the jig. And that open hole allows you to insert a rivet in there and pull the rivet, which secures that position, and then you can take it off the jig and then put the rivet into the next hole. And I know that the online, a couple of the documentation or a couple of the documents online say, don't rivet these holes. So I was mindful for that, and I probably put too many rivets in, but I'm okay with that. I'd rather be a little more secure at this stage of the game and take a rivet out than not put one in and then have it be damaged while I'm working on the rest of the wings and whatnot, because these are going to set aside for a little until the wings are totally done. So this is one more fuel test. One thing that I was doing is there's a separate video that I made specifically for the fuel sender. I'm not using the stock fuel sender that comes with the kit. I'm using a fuel sender from CIES, which it's CIES. If you look up the video, the documentation's over there on it. I feel like it's going to be a lot more accurate of a fuel sender, and also probably last a lot longer because it's just the way it's engineered. So we're moving now on to the next rib. It should have popped up here. But same thing, just get it all lined up, put it in the jig, make sure it's all there, and then start pulling rivets. It's actually, oh, I'm sorry. So this is back to the rib, 4 that I was working on beforehand. A lot of this project is, for me, it's just about continuing to move forward, and it's not always working on the same thing. The rib 3 is the next one. Because if you're not continually working, if you're waiting on a part or to finish one particular section, I think the project just kind of drags out forever. And it's not terrible to stop one thing while you're waiting on either something to dry or a part, and then come back to it. It's just, it takes a few minutes to kind of regroup your time and then move forward with it. So you can see that the parts are going together a little bit faster just because, and then that's how they look when they're all stacked up together evenly. This is the biggest one that's part of the rear fuselage. This one's a little weird because it's got these thin pieces that change the angle on the frame itself. There's, again, really only one way this only goes together, and this one actually doesn't have the jig for it. It's bigger than the jig is. It's just a matter of, again, getting these all lined up and put it together. And you'd build this in 2 halves. You build this in the lower half, and then you build the upper half. It's not one you can assemble together all at the same time. So now that I've got those all together, I was able to put those up on the wall and get them up out of the way. And now that those are out of the way, cleaned up the table and went over to the neighbor's house, grabbed the wing that is for the pitot tube, because that one I think is going to take a little bit more work than the other wing. The other wing doesn't have as much in it. The pitot tube obviously is a little bit more involved, and that's the part that I was waiting on right there. So since I'd set the wing aside, it's probably been 6 weeks or so since the wings were actually out. Obviously got to take the skin off because that was what was holding me up from being able to actually rivet everything down, was that torque tube. But I wanted to make sure that I went back through and far enough back that I could identify where did I stop, why did I stop, what else needs to be done on this before I close it up. These are the ribs that needed to come out in order to be able to get the torque tube in there. And it just slid right in. I mean, that's all I was waiting on, was that one part. And now that I got that done, put the ribs back in, and then go through, make sure that everything's lined up, and start riveting all the last bits of the rib together. There are some cross rivets that needed to go into place, and I needed to get those done. I was aware of that. There's also some bolts that are at the very root of the wing itself, and I'd initially over torqued one of those bolts, and I just kind of twisted right off. So I had a second bolt to replace that with, and got that put in there and torqued it correctly, got it labeled. And actually even couldn't put the back skin, or it's not skin, it's not the skin, it's for the, it's an extender for the skin. I couldn't put that on because that was going to actually attach to several of the ribs. So it was just a lot of work. That one part was kind of show-stopping. And the airplane factory's been pretty good to work with. Scott is the main guy that does the fulfillment, and I'm sure he's tired of hearing from me. But the second one, actually, I just talked to him today. It's the 13th of December, and the second one should be here by this weekend, which is great because I think that this wing is going to probably take me another week or two to complete. Puts me into Christmas, and so the week of Christmas I'll be able to get the second wing taken care of. So again, I'm just kind of double checking everything as I go along here. Put the wing, the skin on the back here, and then the way I've been doing it, Evan's video. Interestingly enough, I was watching his original video, and he mirrors a lot of what he says in the Sling Build video about getting, everything along one line done, and then work on the backside, and then just fill in the ribs in between. The way I've been doing it is, since I've got enough clecos, I'm just doing every other one, every other hole or every other rivet hole all the way along, both the leading edge and the trailing edge of the wing, get those nice and secure, and then doing the same every other rivet, or I'm sorry, every other cleco on all of the ribs and then the cross brace as well. So again, just double checking everything, because the next step is going to be quite a bit more work to take care of. What I'm doing there is mixing up some Pro Seal, because I was going to go ahead and cap off the fuel tank that I'm good with, and since it's almost out of frame, there's really no point of me running that video there. Again, my buddy Jeff is over checking my work and showing him where I'm at with things. And then now that's done, we just go through and we start pulling rivets. And so that's just, the rivets go every other open hole now, and go along. And again, you only go up to the point where the leading edge changes from a double wide set of rivet holes to the single wide. The rest of them stay in place because they need to be there for when the additional skin comes on. See what else? Oh yeah, so you can start seeing clecos coming out. This took a while. There's a lot of rivets on this one to pull. So now that I got all of every other rivet in, I went through and took all the clecos out, and going back through and putting the other remaining holes, putting the rivets into that, and then going through and pulling those out. So that's pretty much it for the leading edge, and we come back around. Oh, yep. So I actually was working on the cross pieces, or the rib, from the front to the back along the rib line, and I was almost working like in a per section. So like each section of the ribs I would complete and then move on to the next one, working my way towards the back. Just noting the rivet. For whatever reason, the instructions have the rivets on the plan as like a 998, and then the rivets are a 153. I don't know why they just didn't do a 153 on the rivets, because that would have made sense. But a lot of times what I'll do, especially in something like this where there's a lot of rivets, I'll go through and I'll mark, the 993 is a 154, or whatever it is. So I don't have to do the translation on the page, because where the translation is at, you got to go back 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 pages to where the main picture is at, and it outlays all of the parts that are going to be used in this particular section of the build. So it just saves a lot of flipping around to be able to do that. And then again, this is you've got, this is the little outlet there. Didn't rivet that all the way out, because there is a flap that comes around from the front, or the top portion of the skin, and that lip fits underneath that last trailing edge there. So that I'm ready for that, and now I'm just going through, and like I said, I'm just working on a per rib basis all the way down. Goes real fast when I speed the video up. So the one thing also, that Milwaukee rivet puller, I've seen a few people talk about that, or have gotten it online. Several other build videos. Not sure that I'd buy that one again. If you're not really super careful, you may notice that I don't have the part that receives the mandrel portion of things. That's because if you're not careful and the mandrel doesn't clear the channel, it'll get jammed in the exit portion of things on the rivet gun. And when they get jammed, it's not trivial. I spent one evening working probably 45 minutes to an hour trying to clear that channel. So the rule at this point in time is if you pull a rivet, you make sure that you know where that mandrel went when you finish pulling it. Um, this one I think was $350 for the rivet gun, and I know that the really nice one that is in the sling build videos is like, I don't know, it's more than $1,000, but it might have been worth it to spend the extra money on something like that. But I spent the money on this, and I'm gonna see how far it gets me. It is doing the job. It's just that there's quirks to it. It's not as easy, I think, as something where you just pull the pneumatic gun and it just sucks the rivet up into the back of the gun itself. So the goal in this stretch here from December 12th was just to get all of this skin tacked down on the back side so that I can get it flipped over. Then the rest of this week is going to be to work on getting the pitot tube installed and the electronics that all go along with it. So only a couple more rows in this one. It's nice when you get all the clecos out because the skin gets a lot smoother. It gets a lot easier to set stuff on top. Although you've got to be a little careful because if you rock it too much, you don't want the iPad to slide off onto the floor. So every once in a while I'll lift it. I'm just kind of curious as to how the wing is stiffening up with the ribs. The next phase here is I've got a camera boom that I'm going to be putting on, and instead of rivets all the way up that particular rib, I'm putting riv nuts in place so that the riv nuts can help anchor those mounting points. And that's just a boom that I bought from one of the camera vendors that they develop stuff specifically for airplanes. So I got all that done. I think the next step here is, this is where I'm doing the riv nuts where the holes are going. And when they go into paint, I'll just put a threaded screw in those holes. And then the other part I needed to do is the hole that I'm about ready to open up here is the access port for the power for the camera. And I just needed to clean up the hole a little bit so that the access panel set in there a little bit better. Not a big deal. Just pop it out, clean it up a little bit, put the rivets back in, and it's back in business. So we got all that done, and it's time to flip it over. And I've got all the wiring that I think I need from Midwest, which has been great to work with, and I just laid it out just kind of get an idea. And now that I've got that done, that's the next step to do. So we'll see you at the next one.